Your microphone might be a little bit close to you might want to just push it down a little bit. Yeah, so it's closer to your mouth than your nose. That's it.
All right, welcome everyone in the chat. Just to make sure you can hear me, if you can hear me, can you please type, "Yes, I can hear you," in the chat box?
Yeah, I think we can see quite a few yeses, so I think everything looks good. 4, 6, 10. 5, 175.
Okay.
I think we're there. Okay.
I think we're there, yes.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Cambridge Online Experience Asia. This is a series of 10 webinars that we have over the course of this whole week to help everybody in these particular times. We have 10 different speakers covering 10 different topics, and we hope that the breadth and the depth of the content will really help you in your teaching. I want to say good morning, but also good afternoon and good evening. It's a great welcome to all of the teachers across Asia. The previous 2 webinars that we had, we saw a large number of teachers, especially from Indonesia and from India, but we also noticed a number of people joining us from Iran and Iraq. And equally, we saw a number of teachers coming and joining us from Peru and Ecuador. So good evening to you all. Many of you will be asking us about certificates of attendance. All of the information for the certificates of attendance we will give you at the end of the webinar. So please do sit tight and wait until the end of the webinar. We'll be giving very, very clear instructions at that point. But without further ado, I would like to hand over now to Alan Davenport, our 3rd speaker of this week. Alan Davenport has been with Cambridge University Press for 5 years, and he is our Professional Learning and Development Manager for our ASEAN region. He has a Bachelor in Linguistics and an MA in Education. Let me hand over the microphone to Alan Davenport. Speaking is more than words. Alan.
All right, thank you, Yvonne, and thank you, everyone. As the slides start to come up, we're just going to go ahead and turn off our video for a second to make sure the bandwidth is going to be okay, as we've got lots of people in the room. So for the slide, there they are. Yeah, perfect. Well, again, thank you for joining me for this. Speaking is more than saying words. I think that this is one of those topics that seems to be universal around the world. People always say to me, Alan, what is it about speaking? How can I get my learners to do speaking? I want some more speaking in my class. What can I do? And I really think one of the issues is when teachers are having a hard time with speaking in the class, I think they think about activities, and I think they think about what's the fun and games that I can do to bring in what we can do to make speaking happen. And I don't really think that that's exactly the answer. And so in this webinar, what I really want to hit is what I mean by speaking is more than saying words, what I mean about planning for speaking and using some frameworks to try to help guide us into making better speaking and better learning happening in our classroom. I think that it is fair to say that speaking is considered one of the most important skills of English. I mean, we know there are 4 skills, and of course in our heart we know that all 4 skills are equally important, of reading, writing, listening, and speaking. But when we surveyed teachers at Cambridge University Press and asked them the order of importance of what they thought skills were, by far you can see at 70% speaking was the number one sort of, well, I mean, by far the number one answer of what they thought was most important. But what was even more interesting in this survey, I think, is that only 50% of the teachers felt confident that their students could cope well in an unplanned conversation in English, and many find it difficult to achieve full engagement from the class with speaking activities. And I think this is the problem we have with speaking. We know it's important, we know we want it to happen, but there seem to be so many obstacles in our way of making it happen. Teachers told us that there's little or no opportunity for students to practice outside of the classroom. And they've told us that there's not enough time dedicated to speaking in their curriculum, and they have a strict curriculum to cover. Speaking practice with large classes can be very challenging. Managing speaking with multi-level classes is difficult. And also finding the topics which will engage students in speaking practice is difficult. These are the things that teachers told us. But I think that there are some other things that I've noticed that teachers didn't tell us that also may have an effect on what's happening in our speaking classes. One of the things is that course books themselves put communicative tasks at the end of lessons. And that can be a problem because a lot of time, we do a lot of times with the reading, and the reading takes more time than we thought it would. And then we want to get the vocabulary, and then there's a grammar point, and then there are questions, and then it looks like it's time to do the speaking that's in the course book. We want to do the practice part of it, and it's, time's up, nothing else, got to move on to the next one. So it seems like where speaking is placed sometimes in our lessons make us feel like we run out of time. One thing that I noticed with new teachers as well is course book speaking activities don't take as much room on the page, as much space on the page. So you might have 2 full pages of reading and a tiny box of speaking. And a lot of times, especially with newer teachers, that means that they spend 3/4 of their class on the reading and just about 1 or 2 minutes on the speaking, which, just because that's how the page layout went, doesn't mean that may be the best use of our time in a class. And also the one that really, really seems to mean a lot to me, or the one that I think has a huge impact on why speaking may or may not be happening, is that teachers tend to see speaking as proof of learning rather than a learning opportunity. And this is key, I think. It's very key that instead of saying, we've learned the present perfect, now let's speak so you can prove to me that you've used it. That's where the speaking tends to stop happening in our classroom, because speaking feels like a test to our learners, especially if it's speaking where we're expecting them to use the language that they have just learned 10 minutes ago. And then we wonder, why don't you want to speak in my class? Really, what we need to do is refocus our own mindset to say that speaking is not proof of learning, but speaking itself is an opportunity for learning. And we don't see speaking as the result of learning the grammar. The right mindset is to say, now we've learned some grammar, let's see if we can use it in the speaking, instead of prove to me you can. And if you remember only one thing from me from this webinar, I would say that is the key. It's not about which game. It's not about which activity. It's not about the magic wand that you can wave to make them happen. It's to make sure that we're viewing speaking as a learning opportunity instead of just proof of learning. So Philip Kerr kind of said it in one of his papers. The answer, according to research, is to reduce the amount of time devoted to language-focused work. This may seem counterintuitive to some teachers. He's saying we need to spend less time on teaching the grammar, less time on explicitly teaching vocabulary, less time on language-focused work. And I think a lot of times when speaking doesn't happen, a lot of teachers, they try to say, you didn't do it. I need to give you more grammar. I need to give you more language. I need to give you, instead of just letting them experiment, instead of just let our learners loose with what they have. A lot of teachers think, I need to teach more language, but it's clear, and let's be honest, that sometimes learners often do not learn what we teach anyway. So the learning really hasn't been a good use of our time. And secondly, we need to understand that learners are more likely to learn when there are plenty of opportunities for oral interaction. And that's a key word, interaction. So how do we plan for oral interaction, and what does that mean? I'm going to show you 3 frameworks which might help us understand what Kerr is saying. And as we go through the frameworks, I'd like for you to think about which would be most practical for you to apply in your teaching. I want to make this clear. I am not saying that you should try to incorporate all 3 in your classroom. That will make us go crazy. These are like 3 different choices for us to look at. So the first one is the CEFR, the Common European Framework of Reference. And I think a lot of us are familiar with the CEFR because of its description of levels, A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. But the CEFR as a framework is so much more than that. It's not a one-page poster. The CEFR is a very long book. And recently they've updated it. I say updated, they've written even a companion volume to help explain parts of the CEFR further. And when you really dive into the CEFR, it's got some brilliant ideas on how to bring in what it calls the skill of production. And this comes from the CEFR itself. It says, seeing learners as social agents implies involving them in the learning process, possibly with descriptors as a means of communication. It also implies recognizing the social nature of language learning and language use. The interaction, there's that word again, the interaction between the social and the individual in the process of learning. Seeing learners as language users implies extensive use of the target language in the classroom. Learning to use the language rather than just learning about the language as a subject. Above all, the action-oriented approach. This action-oriented approach, it's talking about bringing in the language, letting learners use it, letting learners explore it, not just proving they've learned the language, but interacting with the language and each other. It implies purposeful, collaborative tasks in the classroom, whose primary focus is not language. So here we have the CEFR telling us that the trick to really making language or language learning and speaking happen in the classroom is to not focus on the language, it's to focus on something else. And if the primary focus of a task is not language, then there must be some other outcome. If we can't say we're not going to focus on language, but just talk. That won't work. They'll look at us like we're crazy. There must be some other product or outcome. For example, planning an outing, making a poster, creating a blog, designing a festival, choosing a candidate. And descriptors can be used to help to design such tasks and also to observe and, if desired, self-assess the language use of learners during the task. This is a page from the CEFR. I do not expect for you to be able to read it, so don't worry about reading it. But what I want to point out here is that when the CEFR gives us those levels of A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2, when it gives us all of those, it doesn't just give us levels for, how much reading you can do or how much listening or spoken production. Later on through the CEFR, it really breaks it up into things like this, which I've just brought in for its description of overall spoken interaction. There are descriptions for communication and conversation. The CEFR has descriptions of language use, but it also has descriptions of what we call sociocultural or sociolinguistic use, and it has descriptions of pragmatic use and discourse use. I'll give you an example of what I mean. Here's a classroom exchange. I loosely based this on a conversation that I heard one time in a class that I was teaching in Thailand. And by the way, I'm seeing some people saying it's too small. Like I said, I know it was small. I didn't expect for you to read everything. I expected you to get the idea that we can categorize interaction. So don't worry if you couldn't read everything. Anyway, going back to this is a classroom exchange that kind of happened in one of my classes. And the teachers, or the students kind of sounded like this. Hi, Tim. Hi, Tam. How are you? I'm fine, thank you. How are you? I'm fine, thank you. I have a problem. What? I have a stomach ache. You should see a doctor. I don't like doctors. You should see a doctor. Okay, I will see a doctor. Thank you. You're welcome. Bye. And my question for you to think about, just very quickly, is what's wrong with this? Because if I look at the grammar's fine. If I look at the vocabulary's fine. But what's wrong with this exchange? I'll give you about 20 or 30 seconds to think. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of answers come in. You know, it's not smooth, it's curt, it's memorized, it's robotic. And what we see here is, I think, the result of me as a teacher, and this was based on my classroom, wanting to teach these modals, you should see a doctor, and this lesson was obviously about feeling ill. But my students, you know, they would have been very confused at the time, because if I would have said, oh, that's not very good, they would instantly say, what's wrong? My grammar? My vocabulary? And no, it's something different. There's something that's missing. And I learned that I had to focus my feedback on more than just the language. And using the CEFR as a model with its sociolinguistic, with its discourse competence, it really helped me. Another kind of mini framework that I know inspired the CEFR, but that I think is very useful for us as teachers when we want to give feedback, is to remember the cooperative principle. And Paul Grice developed the cooperative principle, or a CP. He stated that speakers will generally obey 4 maxims. And this is kind of what we expect when interaction happens. And the first one is that there should be quality. And by quality, he means a speaker won't give untrue information. They won't say something that's knowably false. Again, sometimes people lie, but generally when we communicate, we expect people to give us true information. The second one also starts with a Q. I'll give you a chance to try to guess what the word is while I describe it. It means that a speaker will give as much or as little information as required by the context of the interaction. So we're going to just give what's needed. And I see this a lot of times when I was a speaking examiner. I would say, where do you come from? And they would say, oh, I come from Nonthaburi. It is a small town in the north of Thailand where I live with my mother, my father. My father is an engineer. My mother is a... All I asked you was, where did you come from? And you're giving me your life story. The problem there wasn't with your grammar, your language. I see it exactly right. It was with quantity. How much we're expected to speak in an exchange. The third one, they will not include anything not important for that situation or context. You know, so if somebody says, oh, where do you want to eat today? Well, one time when I was young, I rode a horse. Huh? Exactly. I see it in the chat box. A lot of people. Relevance. We expect for what is said to be relevant. And the last one, they will try to be clear, unambiguous, not long-winded. I will admit I suffer from this one at times. I can be rather long-winded. I blame it on the American part of myself. But it is what's kind of known as manner, as Grice called it. And these are kind of called Grice's maxims. And if we looked at what was wrong of that previous conversation between Tim and Tam, yes, maybe they had quality. It was true information. And But I don't think the manner was there. They weren't really being clear. I have stomach ache. You should see the doctor. I don't like doctor. You should see the doctor. They didn't really have the quantity that was expected. And when those are broken down, these are these kind of, yeah, that's what goes wrong sometimes beyond the language. And these are what we need to be focusing on as well as a teacher when we're giving feedback in our speaking. Because as I saw yesterday in Nicholas's presentation, we all agree, or those that were there agree, that feedback is so important. But feedback needs to be more than just on the accuracy or even the fluency. It can be based on how well they follow these maxims. I find it hard to kind of remember these maxims. So I kind of just remember, instead of quality, quantity, relevance, and manner, I like to think of it when I'm giving feedback, or when I'm judging a role play, or when I'm looking at my students in action. Were they truthful? Were they informative? Were they pertinent? Were they relevant? And were they clear? And again, when we look back, not all the maxims were followed between Tim and Tam. This is just an example of how the CEFR can help us. The CEFR gives us many scales to look at. It goes deep into areas of interaction and mediation. I like the CEFR because it helps connect learning, teaching, and assessment. You know, it's what especially Cambridge Assessment English uses to develop their exams. It can really join learning and teaches. It is very comprehensive. It reminds us, and this I think is key, that spoken production and spoken interaction are separate. There's a difference between what I'm doing now and what I mean by spoken interaction. I'm doing a lot of spoken production now, and I'm trying to look at the chat box to bring in some interaction. But let's be honest, this is more of a transactional type of speaking that I'm doing. I'm here to give information. It's totally different than the type of interaction that we would be expecting if we were having a coffee. The CEFR helps us measure students' progress in their learning and to be realistic. One of the times, often, I should say, when teachers sometimes judge their students on their speaking ability, it could be that teachers expect too much. And the CEFR kind of keeps us as teachers grounded to see, are the students doing what they should be doing at their level? It reminds us that communicative competence involves linguistic, sociolinguistic, and pragmatic competence, and understanding it can provide comprehensive and strategic feedback. I'm seeing a lot of people say, what is CEFR? It's the Common European Framework of Reference, and it's one framework that's really widely used across the world to make sure, or in language classrooms. I like the CEFR, but it's boring. It's long. It's not the most exciting thing that I've ever read. It's dense. The companion volume is better, but it's not a small read. And it was intimidating to me for a very long time. There's so much there. And to be quite honest, with the CEFR, the Common European Framework of Reference, it may be more than teachers need. It's better for curriculum planning, lesson design, and assessment than it is in-the-moment teaching. When we apply the CEFR, though, I think that this is something to keep in mind. That if we're trying to apply the CEFR to interaction, and we're trying to give feedback based on the CEFR and what it says about spoken interaction, then we need to remember that immersive tasks generate immersive conversations. And as the CEFR companion volume told us, it's time to bring in more things in the class, like having the students solve a problem, discuss an issue, narrating a story, sharing opinions, making things, responding to a stimulus, and spending more time on that than we even do teaching the grammar or teaching the vocabulary. What does this look like in practice? Well, here's a page from a course book called Evolve. And what I really like for you to focus on is look at how speaking is used in this lesson. It starts out with speaking, small, to activate schema, to get us prepared for the topic. When do you celebrate? Who do you celebrate with? And then we prepare. Imagine you and your partner. So we're going to have them in pairs. two of the students, imagine you and your partner are party organizers. You're going to organize a party for another pair. So already we're going to be having them work in groups of 4. Ask the other pair these questions to help you decide the type of party. And then we have the questions there. What are you celebrating? Would you like to invite a lot of people? And they take turns. The first pair asking the second pair, and the second pair asking the first pair. And then those 4 have been, and Linda, I see that some people saying that this has been discussed by Nicholas. Yes, it has, but I think it's worth repeating. When we look at these 4 students that come together to talk about, their perfect parties, then they divide back up into groups of 2. They plan the parties, and then they come back together in the group of 4 to present and share their parties. And all the while, the course book is guiding them along. Decide using the answers. Discuss. Tell your clients about the party you're presenting for them. And think about how much speaking and how much interaction is done in this lesson. This didn't start off with a reading. This didn't start off with a listening. It started off with speaking, and it just changed interaction patterns. And that's this negotiative meeting and working together. This is how speaking can happen in our classrooms. But the students didn't have to do it alone. There were useful phrases given, and I think this is the role of the teacher. It's not to go around and monitor for correctness. It's to go around and just give them little phrases or little sparks to keep going. Monitoring doesn't mean telling them what they're doing wrong. Monitoring means making sure that they're on task and making sure that we're giving them what they need to keep the task going. When our students see us walking around the classroom, they should be happy we're coming because they know we're going to help them, not scared that we're coming because we're going to be telling them what they're doing wrong. And all of that I get reminded of from the CEFR. If you use Cambridge books, the CEFR is fully integrated into them. One of the things that I worry about, if you do know the CEFR, is I find, especially in Asia, there are a lot of books that say they're CEFR or they say A1 or A2 level. But how do you know that it's really CEFR? And I would encourage you, especially with Cambridge books or with your representatives or any publisher that you have, that if they say that it's aligned to the CEFR, ask how. This is our CEFR document that goes with Evolve. And for most of our Cambridge materials, especially the ones that have been aligned with the CEFR, we've gone to great length to make sure that the activities, the interaction patterns, the speaking, the writing, the communicative language competence fits with what the CEFR says. So I'm seeing a lot of things in there that talk about those phrases. Do we have to learn all the phrases? I think that the point of bringing in interaction is to use those phrases if the students need it. They're there for support. They're there for what's called scaffolding, to make sure that the students have what they need. It's not a checklist of students, you need to say this. In fact, if we imagine that the student has said a wonderful, wonderful idea, how are we going to say that was a great idea and your English was perfect, but you didn't use however? That's, I think, where the shyness comes in. That's where the problems come in. Interaction and using these activities for speaking is learning. It's not just proof of learning. You're going to hear me say that at least 5 or 6 more times. That was our first framework. A second and different framework that sometimes people look at is oracy. And in the 1960s, a professor named Andrew Wilkinson thought the oral skills, especially speaking and listening, were being neglected in education. And he used the word oracy to be analogous to literacy and numeracy. Basically, he thought schools are focusing too much on literacy, but we need to have something called oracy as well. And recently, there have been arguments made in support of oracy education that are focused on children's use of first language. But oracy skills can also be developed in the second language classroom. And the oracy skills framework has 4 main categories. And oh dear, it seems like my words have become mixed up. Just for 30 seconds or so, if you like, in the chat box, all of these words are mixed up. Can you take a guess of what any of these categories of oracy might mean? I will remind you that oracy is a different framework from the CEFR. We're done with the CEFR. We're on to oracy now. Any ideas? I'm seeing a lot of right answers. This was too easy. Yep, Chitra, yeah. All right. Oracy skills basically divides listening and speaking into 4 main categories. It says that there's a physical category, a linguistic category, a cognitive category, and a social and emotional category. And when we look at oracy here, we can break down these skills even further. And just in the sake of time, I've broken my maxim of manner, and I've been a little bit too long-winded, so I'm going to kind of hit this just a little bit faster than what I thought I was. We'll go ahead and look at these. The linguistic area of oracy. Well, this is the area that's talking about appropriate vocabulary choice, about register, about grammar, about structure and organization. And it's important, but it's concerned with the choice of vocabulary, the grammatical quality, but it also includes the use of rhetorical devices, the use of metaphor, the use of register, well, not register, but the use of language variation, the use of structure to convey what we really want to say. It's the language part of teaching. There's also a social and emotional. And this category is concerned with speakers' use of language as a tool for building and maintaining social relations. For example, are they able to use talk to work collaboratively, to solve problems? Can they use their language to work with others? Can they listen? Can they respond? And, this is something that if we pay attention to the oracy framework, we can give feedback about in our classes. There are people who have excellent grammar that probably I might not enjoy working with because they don't have this social and emotional skill with their language. There is also the physical, and this has to do with voice and body language, with fluency and the pace of the speech, with your variation and your voice projection, your gesture, your posture, your facial expression. Again, I used to do a lot of examining for a lot of language exams, and especially with teenagers and young learners, listening to them tell a story. I had a birthday party and it was very exciting. You don't sound excited. That's part of the physical use of your voice. And the cognitive, this idea of content, clarifying and summarizing, self-regulating. This category concerns the content of talk and its quality with regard to the task of hand. Does the speaker take account of the level of understanding of a listener? Do they care about their audience? Do they use questions well to inform others? Do they use talk well to reason? In discussions, do they build upon the contributions of others? Oracy is a framework that can be used, again, to give feedback, to plan lessons, to think about the tasks that we bring into the classroom. I like the oracy framework because it says the oracy skills are said to start at birth. I really like that it starts with even our first language, that it encourages purposeful interaction. It's not just saying words because the teacher wants us to say something. It gives us a reason to speak. It acknowledges the importance of confidence and listening and voice. Practical oracy techniques involve a variety of group work, things like snowballing, dyads, triads, and jigsaw. And the techniques for oracy are out of the scope of this webinar. I don't have time to talk about the techniques for oracy, but search for them. Just go to a search engine and type in oracy techniques, and you will find many resources. And it's not just for English, but oracy can be a part of science education, a part of music education, social studies, and mathematics. It's around the whole curriculum. I like the oracy framework, but although it's been implemented successfully around the world, I don't hear a lot of talk about it in Asia. Implementing it in schools requires teachers to understand what it is and what it's trying to accomplish. You can't just say, sounds nice, let me do it. It's going to take work in order to understand oracy. Because just like there's a difference between reading and literacy, there's a difference between speaking and oracy. And it needs to be embraced throughout the school curriculum. If you're going to bring oracy into schools, it can't just be the English class. It has these ideas about it, about our voice being powerful. It goes with all aspects of the curriculum. This comes from one of our primary materials called Primary Path at Cambridge University Press, and it actually has an oracy theme built into it. So if you want to see more about how can I practically do oracy in the classroom, look for Cambridge Primary Path. And this is an example of what we can do with young learners. Oracy skill, participating in a discussion. When we participate in a discussion, we listen carefully and respond. Let's clean up the park. Look, there's a duck over there. Let's clean up a park. I agree. Liam uses let's to make a suggestion. Yes or no? Well, it's yes. Jack participates in the discussion. Well, no. Jack answered Liam, but he didn't answer let's clean up the park. He answered, look, there's a duck over there. These are the ideas of what we can discuss when we're talking about oracy. And we can watch these videos that are with Cambridge Primary Path, or you can bring in these phrases even at the young age and really try to get oracy happening in your classroom. And again, oracy reminds us that speaking is more than just saying the language we learned. It's about participating in the discussion, making sure that we're listening, making sure that we're using our voice and that we're heard. The third framework, again, totally different framework now. Forget CEFR, forget oracy. Now I want to talk about something called the Cambridge Life Competency for Communication. And some of you may have seen Ben Knight's presentation yesterday about the Cambridge Life Competency Framework. And I think that it's a brilliant framework. But there are 6 parts to the framework. And one of the parts is communication. And Ben asked a question yesterday to the room. He asked, which of the parts of the competencies were you most interested in? And by far, critical thinking and creativity, they won. They were the most interesting. More than 60%, I think, said that's really what we want. And I just want to be here to stick up for good old communication. We talk, even if you're familiar more with the 4C models of creative thinking, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication, don't forget about communication. It's a competency too. And yes, we want critical thinking. Yes, we want collaboration, but don't take communication for granted. The Cambridge Life Competency Framework reminds us to focus on communication in our classroom. And what we have here with Cambridge is we've identified 3 core areas within this life competency of communication. Using appropriate language, register for context, managing conversations, and participating with appropriate confidence and clarity. And you might be saying right now, these are 3 different frameworks, but I'm seeing a lot of patterns emerge over and over again. Well, of course you do, because just because they're 3 different frameworks, they're 3 frameworks that all try to hit the same issue, that of interaction and communication in the classroom. So there's going to be some overlap. What I like with the Cambridge Life Competency Framework is we at Cambridge have been able to take those 3 sub-skills and create can-do statements that are appropriate for levels of learning. So you can see here, I've taken a secondary level. We also have them for pre-primary and primary and adult and business and higher education, but here it's secondary. And you can see for using the appropriate language and register for context. And what this does is it allows us to think about the communication that we want to happen in the classroom. And this can help us easily put these into lesson plan aims. And again, it can help us with our feedback. I think that for those of you who are asking about how do I make speaking happen in the classroom, once we're in the classroom, it's kind of too late. We have to be reactive. Making speaking happens in the classroom has a lot to do with how we plan the lesson and planning for interaction. We set ourselves up for so much success or failure with the lesson plan. And I think that the Cambridge Life Competency Framework is the most practical for us to help with developing good lessons. This is it continued just to give you an idea. I like the Cambridge Life Competency Framework because it shows the way communication develops along the learning journey from pre-primary to adulthood and beyond. Well, not beyond adulthood, but into work and professional. It is straightforward and it's easily understandable. It incorporates aims into lesson plans. It focuses teachers to develop their students' communication strategies, and it reflects the type of communication that students will be expected to perform in the real world. That's why it's called a life competency. Now, I like the Cambridge Life Competency Framework, but communication sometimes gets forgotten because it's not exciting as creative thinking or critical thinking. So again, if you decide to adopt the framework, please don't forget about communication. It provides a lot of practical detail, which is great, and it is simpler, which is a positive, but it is not as thorough as the other 2 frameworks. If you're a curriculum planner, if you're a manager, if you're a researcher, you're going to go for the CEFR more. But if you're a teacher who wants to know, how can I make it happen in my classroom? What can I do tomorrow? I think the Cambridge Life Competency Framework is where to start. If you're using a good course book material, or if you're using a course book, many of the parts of the competency will already be taken care of. It's like what Ben said yesterday, for those of you in attendance. The skill of the teachers is to be able to identify the competency, to say, the book is doing this. This isn't about grammar. This is about interaction. This is about making language happen. I need to focus on my feedback about communication. And by basing the framework on age and not language, teachers need to be careful that the aims they choose are appropriate. Just because the life competency says secondary, it doesn't mean that, a brand new learner of English who's at the beginner level is going to be able to do all of those things. You need to make sure that the language level is a factor by what you choose. They're not lists of must-do outcomes. This Cambridge Life Competency Framework is some ideas for teachers that are appropriate at the level that we can bring in to help us get aims in the classroom. This is an example from Think that I think hits exactly this life skill or this life competency of communication. And it does have to do with problem solving. It says the young people in your town aren't happy. They say there's nothing to do. Make a list of suggestions to help solve this problem. Think of that. We didn't just say, what can they do? They can have fun. Yes, what else? It's not a ping pong. We said, make a list of suggestions. And then think about your suggestions. What are the advantages and disadvantages of each one? We're asking you to reflect, to think of your own ideas. And yes, this is a bit of critical thinking. And then we're asking you to share and decide which suggestions you think is the best and to compare your ideas with the rest of the class. That's communication in action. That's interaction. All 3 of these frameworks have something in common. I think it reminds us, as counterintuitive as it may seem, that we need to make sure that there's plenty of opportunities for oral interaction in our lessons. And oral interaction is not, as I mentioned before, it's not saying you just learned the present perfect, now please use it as you talk to each other. I mean, haven't we all had classes where you listen to learners, what did you do yesterday? I went to the movies. And you, what did you do yesterday? I went to the movies with you. Finish, teacher. You know, and what these frameworks remind us is how we can give feedback and how we can plan to make sure that the language is being used, not just that the language is being produced to prove that we've learned. If you've heard me repeat that, I do not apologize. I do not apologize one bit. Time for speaking in classrooms is learning time. It's not time to prove that we have just learned the grammar. Giving time to speaking is giving time to learning. So what's the point? We've seen 3 different frameworks. They have various degrees of complexity. The CEFR is very complex. I just gave you maybe 1% of an idea of what the CEFR is. But they are complementary, not competing. However, I would not try to implement all 3 at once. All 3 promote interaction in the classroom, which is different from just production. A lot of times in our classrooms, when students don't want to speak, it's because they feel like they have to produce the language, not use the language. All 3 of these frameworks acknowledge that there is more to speaking than just saying the words. And they can be used for planning lessons, understanding course book approaches, and providing complete feedback for our students. This was just a taster. I hope in 45 minutes you didn't expect for me to be able to solve all your speaking problems in your classroom. I hope what I've done is given you just some ideas of, that there are frameworks out there that can help focus our mindsets as teachers. Now I have a poll, and Yvonne, if you could help me with the poll and get the poll started. I have a poll, and I'm just interested. Of all 3 frameworks, which one would you find the most interesting, and would you like to know more about, or which one did you find the most interesting? I'd kind of like for you to share. I know some people found more than one interesting, but I'm asking you to choose. Yeah. I like what I'm seeing. The Cambridge Life Competency Framework for Communication. That makes me happy. It really does. Yes, as I said, critical thinking is a life competency, and creativity is a life competency, but so is communication. And focusing on it as life competency can be, it can be very, very easily done just by a shift of what we do in the classroom. I'm so happy to see about 50% of the people appreciating that one. As I said, this was just a taster. I hope that I've made your appetite enough that you want to learn more about one. I don't have enough time, and we're not going to be experts about it today, but what I've done is I've put together a PDF, and this PDF has links that you can follow to find out more about each of these individual frameworks. It has a link to the research from Philip Kerr about interaction, and then there's 2 links about the Common European Framework of Reference. It has the links about the Cambridge Oracy frameworks and a paper written about it. And it has a link for the Cambridge Life Competencies framework that you can take and read on your own. Remember, don't try to do everything at once. If you're inspired to use all 3 in your classroom tomorrow, calm down. Calm down. Learn a little bit more. Figure out which one is the most useful for you, and which one you think will help you plan and give better feedback to make the speaking more about interaction, and as a result, more likely that it's something that students will want to do in the classroom. So that was my presentation. I want to thank you very much for your time, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Alan, for what is an absolutely fantastic seminar on speaking. I often say that, there's no reason to speak unless you have a purpose. And I think these three different frameworks here have helped us understand how better to understand that purpose and also to give purpose to our students speaking. What I would like to do now, if I may, is just take the opportunity to publicly thank Alan. So if you could all just show your appreciation and put clap, clap in the chat as an applause to Alan, that would be great.
Oh, thank you.
We can't hear your applause, but we can certainly see your applause. That would be absolutely great. Thank you very, very much, Alan. That was absolutely superb.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Do we have a few moments for any questions? Alan?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think we have about 5 minutes for questions before we give the information about the certificates. Yeah.
Okay, if you do have any questions, please do make sure that on the right-hand side of the screen where you can see the chat window, you have an option of chat mode and also an option of ask a question, Q&A mode. So if you turn Q&A mode on, that will help us find the question a little bit easier.
And my chat box is going very quickly, Yvonne, so if you spot one that you like, just go ahead and...
How to encourage oracy to students who aren't fluent enough. That actually, I think I have seen quite a number of times that many of the attendees have been worried about students in the class who don't feel comfortable, don't have the range of vocabulary and the grammatic competence to speak. What would you say about that?
I'd say that we need to refocus our idea on what fluency means. If we're expecting students to be fluent with new language, it's never going to work. What I like is Paul Nation's idea of fluency. And his idea of fluency is it's something we already can do. We're just going to be faster at doing it. So fluency comes from repeating tasks. Fluency comes from, I can tell you that in Thailand, when I go into even the lowest level of primary classrooms, students are very fluent at, hello, how are you? I'm fine, thank you, and you. Fluency does happen. So I think what we have to do is make sure, like I said, when we're focusing on that idea of fluency, that we're making sure that the level of language that we're expecting is easy for the students, that we are not jumping on any mistakes that they make, and as long as the meaning gets across, that we consider that success, and that we encourage them to give second, third, and fourth chances with the language. Teachers are sometimes afraid to repeat tasks in class because they're afraid that the students will get boring or will get bored. I think that it's really the teachers who are getting bored. If the students really, know that they could be better at something, they're more likely to want to have that second chance, that third chance. So lower the difficulty of what you're expecting or of what the task means. And just make sure that they get lots of practice to repeat it. The other thing that I'd say, again, I don't have that maxim of manner. I'm long-winded. The other thing that I would say is let's make sure that we sneak in some speaking sometimes. One of the best lessons I ever did, I did repeatedly with teenage learners, where I just stopped the lesson and I said, hey, I'm thinking of buying a new mobile phone. What mobile phone should I buy? I wasn't looking for a new mobile phone. I did this 3 or 4 weeks in a row, for over the classes that I taught at the university and the high schools that I was at. But when they think that you're asking for yourself and they're less worried about, am I saying what the book needs, that produces language. And I was getting wonderful language in English from these students who were trying to convince me, iPhone's best. No, not iPhone, do Android. No, Oppo, no, you need Samsung. You get language when they forget that they're speaking English and they have a purpose. It's exactly what oracy and the CEFR and communication is about. They're forgetting that they're doing the grammar. They're speaking to communicate. How is that for an over-talked answer?
Do you have time for one more? I've noticed that quite a few times in the chat, people have asked. I saw from Mamduk, from Melissa, and also from Siswanto Sarbini, questions about overcoming anxiety or shyness with students for speaking.
I think that there's two things to keep in mind. One is that there's a difference between shy and inhibited. And the difference is a shy student is shy in our classroom. They're shy outside of our classroom. They're shy all of their life. And if you notice them being shy on the playground and shy, I mean, if that's part of who they are, I think we need to honor and acknowledge their shyness and work more in pairs, work more to where we can monitor them and not expect them to have things in front of the group. You know, I actually, as much as I love to talk, I clam up in front of large groups unless I'm on the stage. I don't like to participate in groups of 200 or 300 where I'm expected to, I get shy. And I think that that's just a reflection of who I am as a person. So for the truly shy person, let's modify our tasks. Let's do more pair work. Let's monitor them more, and let's make sure that we're throwing them easy things and giving them chances to succeed. Now, the inhibited student is different. The inhibited student is the one that you know has the personality that would speak, but they're afraid to speak in English. And I think there it's about making a safe speaking environment where you're very clear on what you're expecting from them. If we're doing something about the present perfect, for example, and we want them to practice, you need to tell your students, I'm going to go around and listen, and I want to listen for the present perfect. And if they make a mistake on something else, don't correct them on something else. Correct them only on the present perfect, because that will let them know again that you're there to help. And also when we're doing these interaction activities, making sure that we're in pairs and we're in groups, and that you give them time to just be in their pairs and groups. If we're hovering over them the whole time, of course they don't want to speak. I don't want to speak with someone standing over my shoulder the whole time. A lot of times it's leaving them alone and letting them happen. One more thing, because I'm going to overtalk it. If you're in a monolingual classroom, I think that trying to make it English only is a mistake, and this is controversial. I don't want them to use their first language because they're lazy. I don't want them to use it as a crutch. But if used right, the first language as a tool can help communication. So a lot of times as a teacher, what I used to do with a student who was kind of inhibited to speak in English, I'd say, well, what do you want to speak? Tell me in Thai first. And they'd get the idea out. And then I'd say, that's a great idea. Now let's try to say that same thing in English, using the first language as a tool to get to English. I believe not in the English only classroom. I believe in the English as much as possible classroom. That's how I would encourage shyness and inhibition to not happen. I wouldn't encourage it, as I'd encourage it to not happen. So there we go. All right, thanks for the questions.
Thank you very much, Alan. Could we just have finally then one final round of applause for Alan? Thank you very much. Alan's my hero, absolutely. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so what I would like to do then is I would like just to give you a little information about how we can pass on to you the certificate. So I'm going to turn off my video right now. So if you could make sure that you are watching this now. If you need a certificate, first of all, after this webinar is complete, you will receive an email, just like you received all of the other emails about the registration and letting you know that the webinar is ready. This email will come to you. Also, as soon as I stop talking, we will be sending you a link through this webinar platform as well, and it will look like a pop-up window, and you can just accept it. Either reply to the link in the email or follow the link from this webinar platform. Do one or the other, but do not do them both. Do not do them both. Just one or the other. And that link will take you to a survey. It's a very short survey. We say that it's 5 to 8 minutes, but actually we have seen it takes everybody less than 5 minutes to complete. But please do this in the next 4 hours. If you complete the survey, remember, you only need to do it once, and either from the link in the email or from the pop-up window that comes in this platform, then you should be able to get a certificate of attendance from us within the next 2 to 3 weeks maximum. It shouldn't take longer than that. However, please let me really emphasize this point. Make sure the name that you write in the survey is the name you want on your certificate, and make sure that the email address on the form is correct. We cannot send you one if the email address is incorrect. Please check and double check your name and the email address on the survey form. And we can only send, unfortunately, certificates to people that we have been able to check and validate were participating in the webinar. But also to stay up to date, just to let you know that Cambridge University Press in Asia also has for our ELT material a Facebook page. You can find us Cambridge Asia ELT. We're pretty easy to find, and we do multiple posts for the region. Also, if you go over to our website, you will find loads of resources for teachers in the current situation right now. How to teach remotely. We have blog posts. There are lots of resources to help you teach it with specific materials as well. And finally, just a big thank you for taking part in the third of this week's 10 webinars. We hope to see you again either later today or on Wednesday, Thursday or Friday. And you should be receiving a link very shortly through this platform. Thank you very much and look forward to seeing you again.